Hello and welcome to episode 5 of Cultivating Candor, a community for honest Christian discussion, content, and commentary. Today we look at pet zebras, generational church trends, faith journeys, and deconstruction. Our interview with Tim Meier will dig into the journeys of faith, deconstruction, and the way back to Jesus. I'm excited about this episode, and we're thankful that you are here with us. Let's go. Hello, and welcome to episode 5 of Cultivating Candor.
Good morning,
I'm Marv Nelson.
I'm Drew Walker.
And we are glad that you are here with us today. We're going to start off with a ruckus report, and this ruckus report is definitely ruckusy.
It's one of my favorites.
It has nothing to do with any generation. It has to do with Ed the zebra. So I want to read this to you. Not too long ago, it was actually June 9th that this happened. But it's still pretty relevant because it's ruckusy. I want to read it to you here really quickly because I can't memorize all of this entire article. So it says this. In Tennessee, a runaway pet zebra that was on the loose for more than a week in Tennessee and became an internet sensation in the process was captured Sunday, authorities say. Ed, the zebra, was captured safely after being located in a pasture near a subdivision in the Christiana community in central Tennessee. The Rutherford County Sheriff's Office confirmed. The Sheriff's Office said aviation crews captured the zebra.
They put him in a little net, and they just fly him across Tennessee. And he's just like...
Oh, poor zebra. Ed was airlifted and flown by helicopter back to a waiting trailer, the Sheriff's Office said in a statement. The video posted by the Sheriff's Office, and we'll put this article in the notes.
Please watch it.
Shows Ed wrapped in a net with his head sticking out as he's carried by a helicopter to the trailer. Ed arrived in Christiana on May 30th, the Sheriff's Office said. His owner reported him missing the next day. The zebra was spotted and filmed running along Interstate 24, forcing deputies to shut the roadway down. But Ed escaped into a wooded area. So, what really cracks me up is this dude, he owns a zebra, right?
How does that even... How do we get there?
I don't know. He owns a zebra, loses the zebra in Tennessee, and then calls the authorities that he lost his pet zebra. I don't know if you know, but having a pet zebra is illegal. And it's almost like having a pet lion, just less dangerous.
Dumb.
Obviously. We talked earlier, reminds you of the guy who had all those lions. What was his name again?
Oh, yeah, the Tiger King.
Tiger King. It wasn't lions, it was tigers. Still just as dumb, right? But why do we bring this to you? Well, we want you to laugh today as you're watching this. And just to encourage you not to have your own Ed the zebra.
Yeah, you might have money. Don't spend it like that.
Yeah, and if you lose your zebra, just pretend it doesn't belong to you.
Right, make that a private search.
Private search. Yeah, well, I mean, I guess if the internet is blowing them up on TikTok and Facebook and Instagram, taking all these photos and videos of the zebra.
Yeah, fair.
Now, what would you do? You see a runaway zebra near the interstate or on 422 near where we live in Indiana, PA. What would you do?
I mean, I'd still go to work because I got to get to work, but I would definitely double take, triple take, call my wife like, hun, there is a zebra on the highway. She'd be like, no, I promise you, I saw a zebra. I'd tell my daughters about it. My daughter Sarah would be like, you're lying. Like, what are you talking about? Like, I saw a zebra today. I'm not lying to you. He was out there just frolicking, gallivanting around. I wouldn't call nobody, though.
I would stop. Stop.
I'd probably record it and, like, send it, depending on, the driving aspect.
Right,
you don't want to record and drive.
Can you pull over?
Yes. Worth it.
Yeah.
Why is traffic backed up? This is worth it.
This guy right here is filming, and everybody would be doing
yeah.
it. I mean, you'd be in a traffic jam, right? I mean, trying to...
You get to work, and your boss is like, why are you late today? Just showing the video? Yeah, all right, cool, that's fine.
yeah, and be like, well, I would have done that too. Right? I mean, there's no more rubbernecking than there would be with a zebra on the highway.
Right.
Oh, man. Anyways, you should look at the article in the show notes. You'll laugh as much as we did.
Fantastic.
Super random. But the picture the picture of Ed being carried away is amazing.
Defying gravity of
do not miss watching that video. So, well, that's it for Ruckus, right? We can't just be all ruckus and no importance.
Yeah,
right?
we gotta be adults.
We gotta be adults. We want to bring it down to you, as Christian community, as we talk about real things that are happening, things that are affecting the church, things that are affecting the generations. Our goal is for you as a Christian, whether you're a Christian leader, Christian parent, wannabe Christian parent, whatever it is, we want you to be able to be informed about things that are happening in the church, surrounding the church. We talked about deconstruction. And later on the show, we'll talk with Tim Meier about faith journeys. And one of the faith journeys is, in fact, deconstruction, but also the coming back to faith in Jesus.
Okay.
So we'll talk about that in a little bit. But today, I want to talk with you, Drew, about some generational trends that you and I are noticing in the church. As pastors, we had been previous youth pastors, both of us. Now I'm a lead pastor, and you are a worship and young adult pastor. So we've been able to see trends. I've been in ministry for 20 plus years, and so I've been able to see some of these trends personally. And one of the things I want to talk about is the issue of church attendance, right? Now, church attendance is not the basis of your salvation.
Not at all.
Church attendance is not the thing that's going to determine heaven or hell for you.
Right.
But it does show an importance of Christian community and being grown in your faith in that community.
I believe it's Hebrews that talks about not giving up meeting together. And I could be wrong about that reference.
No, it's Hebrews. Yeah, well done. Do not forsake the gathering of believers. Yeah, for sure. But one of the things I've noticed, with boomers and Gen Xers, church attendance was higher, and they were the type of parents who developed their schedule around church or work or the adult schedule. And with millennials and Generation Z as well, we've seen a trend where their schedules are dictated by their kids. So their kids' schedules, sports, and all these different things. And so many sports now happen on Sundays.
Yep.
So, I guess the question is, as we have been in ministry, and those who are listening are wondering why this would be, I'd be interested in seeing your thoughts as you've engaged with parents and teens alike on why this would change.
Yeah, so the first thing I think about with our generation is there's a skepticism on the validity of church and the authenticity of church leaders, and that has led to a devaluation of the importance of attending church. So while there are some that may truly 100% believe in Jesus, there's been instances of church hurt where they're just like, I don't know if I want to be in this building with these people because I've experienced stuff that's not been very Christian-like. So there's not as much intentionality to be there. So, and I've seen videos and read articles and stuff like that about parents who, and probably very genuinely, have seen their kids minister to other kids at these sporting events and stuff like that, which is good. And there's no, I'm not knocking that at all, but there is something about having that Christian community on a regular basis that I think helps with your sanctification, helps with your growth and knowledge, not just in the Word of God, but also in how to live that out practically. I know for myself, yes, I was a pastor's kid, but all of my friends that I went to elementary, middle school with, they went to my church. So there is that accountability, almost that unspoken accountability to each other, where it's like, if we were cutting up in school, you could look over, see your friend kind of walking by. They know what you're doing is wrong. You know that they know what you're doing is wrong. So there's kind of like, okay, I can't just do what I want whenever I'm not at church. There's always someone kind of checking me. And I think there's some validity to that. And I kind of think it's missing from this current generation. Not entirely, but it's not as prevalent as it was, I would say.
Yeah, I agree that there's a lot of millennials push back in the church. There was a study done that was done by Barna, and the book came out in 2007, so a while back, back when the iPhone first came out, so that's how old it is. But it was an early study of millennials.
Okay.
And the reason why they weren't coming to church themselves when they were growing older was because of hypocrisy. That was one of the highest ones. also the politicization that happens in church. So bringing too much politics into church rather than just preaching the Bible, that was pushing millennials away. So, I think part of it is the stats that we saw in 2007. As they grow older, I mean, to be honest, a lot of that has consistently remained.
Which
and
is
even
unfortunate.
in today's world, the politicization, I think, is higher than it has ever been in church. No matter if you're in a blue church or a red church or a middle church, there's all kinds of stuff that is being politicized from the pulpit, which, I'm totally against, to be honest with you, because I just want to preach the Bible.
Right.
But I can see why millennials who walked away are not coming back with their children because of those facets still being in place in the church.
Yeah.
But I think there's also, it might be a knee-jerk reaction.
Okay.
Where millennials' schedules were not as important to their parents. Their parents didn't show up to their games. That's possible with boomers working all the time. Gen Xers were trying to figure out what it means to be a parent. And so I think that because they had already rejected church, didn't feel, like you said, that church was going to be helpful for their kids. And I also believe the knee-jerk reaction is the importance of the kid schedule, as I mentioned, where they want their kid to feel, important, encouraged, strengthened, almost to a helicopter type of way of
there's an
living.
extreme, but the intent isn't bad in and of itself. I think, and I don't think anyone would disagree with that. No, you want to be there for your kid, let them know that you have their back, and there's someone that has there's interested in supporting them. But yeah, there's definitely a almost extreme swing of the pendulum in some cases.
Yeah, I mean, and I think the importance of kids is good, and trying to get kids involved in stuff is excellent. And it should be. Sorry, I hit my microphone. And it should be important to the lives of the family. But I think there's also an easy acquiescence that millennials have to their kids. And what I mean by that is that when their kids are whining or complaining, they just are done with it. They don't want to deal with it. So,
which I understand that
feeling.
I
mean, I do too. You often want to put them on screen so they can just go
so,
away
and
leave you alone. So there's that selfishness of trying to appease the kid for your own gain. But there's also that sense of, man, I want my kids to have experiences.
Yeah.
Millennials are all about experience.
Which is so good, in my opinion. That's really good.
I mean, instead of buying a big car, many millennials are taking their kids to Disneyland. They never went to Disneyland, and their dad had a nice...
There were 6 of us. I saw Disneyland on commercials.
Commercials. I love it. So, I mean, and millennials are having less kids than other generations. So I think that's part of it as well, that they have more time to focus on these individual kids. But the whining and the, I want to do this, I want to do that, there's an acquiescence that happens, I think, definitely more than my parents. If I whined, I was not, they didn't give in.
No.
They were like, okay, you're grounded, go to your room. I'm like, wait, what? Come on, Dad. And the more you whine, the more you do time.
Yeah, we got some cry. You want to cry? Give you some cry back. So I didn't do nothing. I'm just mad.
So I think that's a huge part of it, is that that kids are just dictating the schedule of parents. Yeah. And parents are abdicating their role often to screens or to coaches or to these different things.
Because it's a lot easier.
Yeah, it is easier. But the difficulty then comes in is, if you're not doing devotions at home, if you're not praying with your kids at home, if you're not talking gospel life at home, you're not living gospel life at home,
right,
and you say you're a Christian, they're going to look at that and say, well, are you really? What is Christianity?
Right.
And so we want to raise our kids in the way that they should go, as the Bible tells us to. And part of that is following Scripture and not hindering the gathering of believers.
Kids are going to pay more attention to what you're doing than what you're saying.
Yep.
And I'm not saying that as a high in my... I'm checking myself on that.
Always. We always have to. Because we have to look at our own lives and say, is my life in line with the gospel?
Right.
Is my life in line with the gospel when I'm in private? Is my life in line with the gospel when I'm in public, when I'm at home? Does it change? Is there hypocrisy? Because as we saw with millennials, hypocrisy pushed them away from the church.
Right.
And I think it will just do it more and more for the generations to come. So acquiescing to your kids' schedules is not the best way to go when it comes to faith,
right,
and to church. And I think if you remember from episode 1, we talked about the positive effects that Christian community has on the life of kids. So, they have a 25% less chance of being suicidal or having suicidal ideation when they're in Christian community.
Yeah.
So if you're really worried about your kids, it shows that, man, Christian community is a vital piece of what should be in their lives so that they can be known, they can be named, and they can have that sense of belonging in the church.
Yeah.
And so when you see that trend, I think it's one of those trends that is a dangerous trend. Now, people will say, well, you're pastors, you're just talking about your money, your job, and you just want to make your church big and feel big. I mean, that's not the case. It really comes from a place of concern.
Yeah, like I do not care if you come to my church, if you go to someone else's church. What I care about is that you're plugged in somewhere. If it's at our church, great, we'd love to have you. If you feel like, hey, this church is those real, that's fine. As long as you're plugged into a Christian community and your kids have that kind of faith-based community around them, that's all we care about. At least me,
I do too. It's about the kingdom.
There's some churches that are like, oh, we don't. I'm like, nah, bro, that's not. Like you said, it's about the kingdom.
Yeah, it's not about our individual kingdom.
Exactly.
It's about the kingdom of God.
Exactly.
And another generational trend that I've seen that's different in millennials is also discipline. I mean, we've already talked about the idea of acquiescing to your kids, but discipline is one of those things that has different. Different connotations today than it did then. I mean, one of the things I often say in parenting is we have to find the currency that affects our kids.
Yeah.
So screen time is a good currency.
Oh, yeah.
It's one of those things where you could just take it away. But, many parents are like, well, if I take that away, it affects me. Well, yeah.
You're a parent, sorry.
Yeah, it does. It does.
It's just the reality of our situation.
It does affect you. I know I got the paddle, when I was a kid.
We got the shoe, the flip-flop, the open hand.
Yeah.
Funny, real quick. So my mom came home one day. She had a plastic spoon. That we were probably 11, 12 at this point. And shout out to my mom. She's fantastic, but this always cracked me up. So she came in, plastic spoon. She goes to her older brother, hey, come over here. He goes, huh? And she just taps him on the hand with it. He reacts, ah! And ever since then, she kind of had this look on her face that was like, if y'all ever cut up, this is what I'm using. Put us in line a little bit. We're like, you know what? I don't think I want to test that out.
No, I would not want to test that out either.
No.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting the difference in generations. We talked a little bit about technology last episode and how we all use technology differently.
Yeah.
And we all use technology differently. And the currency, like I said, is screen time. But there's also, other areas of currency that we need to figure out. How can we properly discipline our kids? And the lack of respect for older people that this younger generation has is definitely interesting.
I actually saw a video of this young boy. He was at a restaurant throwing food at this older couple. Throws a french fry, hits an older lady in the head. The older man, he's probably mid-70s, early 80s, gets up and he's just punching this kid out.
He punched a kid?
He punched him out. And it was one of those things where it's like, oh, that's not the best way to have handled that. But I understand. And hopefully the young boy learned a lesson that day. Like, hey, if you mess around, you might learn something.
I think the old man learned a lesson too.
Oh, yeah, he's probably...
You hit a kid, you go to jail.
Oh, yeah, probably. But it's just one of those, real life lessons. I was like, you can't just do what you want with everybody. Some people aren't going to... You got to be careful.
Yeah, man. Yeah.
Sorry, continue.
No, it's okay. And then another trend that I've noticed, and I'm not sure if it's because the onset of the megachurch that has taken place since the 80s really booming in that sense, but it's what I call the in and out Christian. Where they come into service, they come late, right, and then they leave
like
early.
As soon as that sermon's over, and then they talk about, I don't feel like there's community, I don't feel like I'm involved. It's like, well, on the one hand, we can evaluate where could we be adding some different programs or events to make it happen, but at the same time, are you engaging with that? There's got to be some personal responsibility there too. So
yeah, I mean, I remember as a pastor's kid when church was over, everyone was there on time. Most of them were early, already sitting in their pews waiting for church to happen. And then at the end of church, the lobby was full of people. There was always talking, hugging. And my dad is a pastor. he called it the pastor's 1 minute, where he'd be stopped by someone and they said, "Oh, just give me a minute of your time." And all of us kids and my mom, we knew it's time to go home.
Yep.
Because this 1 minute is not going to be 1 minute. And, imagine 30 different church members saying, "Hey,
All
can I
those
get a
1
minute every time?"
yeah.
Oh,
yeah. Oh, yeah. Like, even now, like, my dad, he's incredibly well known within the Alliance, for those of you who don't know. But as a kid, we just knew as soon as church was over, we were super close to home. So when we were old enough, Mom would just be like, "Hey, y'all just walk home. We'll see you there." Even now, like, I'll be sitting there talking to my dad. If I leave for a second, try to come back, and I see there's like 1 or 2 people, I'm just like, I'm just going to go back to my room. I'll catch them later.
Yeah, for real. But what do you think is I know we haven't studied this, but just from our own personal experience, what do you think is the reason for the in and out Christian?
I know for me personally, I'm much more of an introvert. So there's that anxiety over new interactions, that awkwardness, that fear of that awkwardness, where it's just like, okay, if I'm new to this church, even if they're super welcoming and super loving, me going to approach someone to engage a conversation is just like, I don't know. Or someone approaching me, and like, I may not know what to say, especially if I'm a new believer, or like I'm still figuring out if I like this Jesus thing. Man, I don't know if I'm going to say the wrong thing, do the wrong thing, and they might. And because of the understandable narrative about like hypocrisy in the church, and like, oh, this person might think I'm just this horrible sinner, all that stuff can just well up and you bounce. So I get that. I understand that. But again, it's one of those things, you kind of have to just take the risk at some point. And for us within the church, we are the ones, I believe, who should be the ones stepping out, because they're coming in. If someone's coming into my church who doesn't go here, I'm the sort of the anchor. They're the new person. I need to be the one to make sure, hey, you are welcome here. Hey, you're seen. Even if we don't become best friends and like they go off and start making other friends with the church, that's fine, as long as you're engaging in that community. But I think we should be the ones to initiate that. And I admit I'm not the best at it, especially with my job. I'm up on the stage and all the way around. It's like it's tough for me to do. Yep. But as much as I can, I'll try to stop by and say hi to people before service starts. I'll have conversations. If there's someone new that I've never seen before, I make it a point before I get up there, "Hey, my name's Drew. It's so nice that you're here." Yep. Have conversations. So being willing on our end to kind of bridge that gap, I think will make a big difference. But I can understand. That's just one perspective of potential just fear of that new interaction that I think could wig people out a little bit, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but I've seen it, and maybe you have too. People that have been in the church for at least a year are still in and out. And there is that, hey, there's no community here, but there is that sense of, man, you need to make that effort. And if you have that one conversation once, that person's not going to be new next week. So you can have a better conversation with them the following week. I think it might even just go back to some of the scheduling with kids stuff. Oh, I gotta get my kid to soccer,
That's
or
fair.
I gotta do this. At least they were there. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? And they were allowing their kids to see the importance of getting there. But community is a vital thing, and the gathering of the body of believers is not just on a Sunday in the sanctuary. You can invite people into your house, break bread. That's community. Yeah. And gathering those people together, I think, is an important thing. It does seem to be generational. I'd have to really dig deep and dive into research on it. But the final trend that I see in church is service. And I think that this stems around from the idea, honestly, of selfishness. All across
consumeristic Christian kind of thing.
What's that?
Consumer church kind of. Yeah.
All across the United States, churches are recording less service. Less people working with kids, less people working with youth, less people cleaning up after church. Less people doing a lot of things that they're just not doing anymore. Yeah. We even have some folks in our church who are in their 60s still serving in children's ministry because there's not enough young folks that are stepping up to take the plate. Now, it's not I don't want that to sound like I'm shaming anyone, right? But I think it's important to recognize the trend and ask the questions, well, why is that? We did a survey in our church that said that people are just exhausted. Yeah. People are tired. And I think part of that is because they're letting their kids be part of too many things. And so instead of cutting out some of those things and releasing some of their exhaustion, they're just continue going down that path. And that group of people who said they were exhausted is the younger Xers and the older millennials. Like, I'm just exhausted. They're in their 30s and 40s, and they're like, man, I'm just always tired. I'm working hard. I'm taking my kids all these places. And so I definitely get that, but it definitely hinders the church
Yeah.
where we're not willing to serve. If you're going to be coming every week, 1 week out of the month, that's
Plug
not
in
a lot.
somewhere, yeah. Yeah, there's a program that I went to when I was in college. It's called the Lift program in the Adirondacks, shout out Camp of the Woods. But one of the biggest lessons that I took from that was, well, two of them. A, intentionality, doing stuff on purpose.
Yep.
And B, when you go to a church, not looking, kind of like the Roosevelt, is it Roosevelt? Not what the church Kennedy, not what the church can do for you, but what you can do for the church. What gifts do you have? What things can you offer to the body of the church? And for me, when I came out of that program, first thing I did when I came back to my dad's church, I was like, okay, let me get plugged into the worship team. Started off with the children's ministry. We had a great time. Then one Sunday they needed help upstairs, so I went and played, and then my dad didn't let me back downstairs. But through that, I found my calling. Like, I still remember coming out of a rehearsal and just kind of sitting there and just kind of had the sense like, I think this is what I'm supposed to do. Now, I don't know what the Lord's going to do with that. It might change as we get older, but as I get older. But at the same time, it's just like, had I not done that, had I not stepped in with whatever I had to offer, I may not have found that either as quickly or in the same way. I may not have found it at all. I may not have realized it, I guess.
Yeah.
But because I was in there, I just had that sense like, man, I think this is what I'm supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
So...
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I think it's important for all of you who are listening and or watching that service is an important part of what we're called to be and do as disciples. And it will draw out more of our giftings and see more of who we are. But the added bonus to it is that you begin to have a community with those that you're serving with. And that's a key aspect to church.
Big time.
I always think of when I was in middle school, we had young adults, they were young parents, young families, who served in the middle school youth ministry at our church. And they're still best friends today.
Yep.
They hang out, they play Frisbee, they play hockey. I mean, and they're in their 50s and 60s, and they're still best friends. And it all began because they decided to serve middle school kids. Now, that's wild, wacky, crazy stuff. And they had to deal with a whole lot of mess for 20, 30 years of ministry. Yeah, I mean, I was one of the middle school students as well. But it's an important aspect.
Yeah.
And, I think you can see some of the things that we're looking at in the church and the trends. Maybe you agree with them. If you're a pastor, you've seen them yourselves. If you're a church member who's been going and serving, you see it yourself. And you're probably frustrated with it, as sometimes it can be. But if you're watching this and you're saying, man, I just haven't been going to church a lot. I have not been bringing my kid to church. I've not been serving. Just pray and say, Lord, is it something that I should be doing?
Yeah, be willing to obey, yeah.
I bet he'll say yeah, because it's an important part of discipleship. Well, that's all we got for these generational trends. We'll talk more about other generational trends coming down the pike. But we're going to now interview Tim Meier, a friend of mine. He works as a vice president in the Christian Missionary Alliance National Office, which is the denomination that Drew and I are part of. And he's going to bring some good conversation around the idea of faith journeys, as well as deconstruction and the way back home to Jesus, which I think is important for you as our podcast audience to think through these processes. And as a believer, as a parent, as a church leader, as a church pastor, whatever you may find yourself in, these are good conversations to engage with. And the generational differences. Where do you find yourself? I think those are some good things for you. So, Drew, thanks for being here with me. And thanks for watching. Cultivating Candor, episode 5. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you for episode 6. Hello, and welcome back to Cultivating Candor, a community for honest Christian discussion, content, and commentary. Today, I have one of my good friends with me. He's also a colleague in ministry, was one of my professors at Alliance Theological Seminary. He is a pastor, vice president, and missionary, Tim Meier. Thanks for being here with us today, having all those titles, all those jobs. I am glad that you were able to make space for us today at Cultivating Candor.
Man, it's an honor, Marv. I think a ton of you. I'm glad for what you're doing here, so it's great to be here.
Thank you. Thanks. I appreciate and love everything that you do for the Alliance as well. And I think you and I have chatted a little bit about where we have gone in the podcast in the last couple of episodes. But the first 2 episodes, we had 2 people who were walking through their journey of faith. And one was currently deconstructing their faith, and she still is pretty loudly on her TikTok, while the other had somewhat already reconstructed theirs and had a bending closer towards Jesus, but still with a couple of different theology beliefs than you and I would have. But you've been around the world seeing all sorts of faith journeys along the way. And one of the things I was curious as to what you thought or what your answer would be to this question is what are key elements to a healthy faith journey? Because there's healthy journeys and there's unhealthy faith journeys.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think where my mind goes first is actually the way you phrase the question, which is journey. This is not, faith is not just a transactional like decision we make and then we're in a club and all those kind of things. We're on a true journey of discovering who God is, discovering who we are, discovering who other people are. And so that's a journey of humility, of surrender, all that kind of stuff. So part of in that journey, what I see as threads, and you could say a lot of things here, but the first thing actually that came to mind was honesty. And I know that's a big key in the podcast, but when people are healthy, they're honest. They're honest with doubts, they're honest with frustrations. You see in the Psalms, the psalmist is often quite honest. Like it would make us uncomfortable sometimes if a pastor stood up in front of church and said, like, God, you've abandoned us.
Yeah.
You'd be like, no, or like kill my enemies. You're like, but it's honest. And I think some of if we're not honest, it's because we're afraid,
Yeah.
afraid of what people might think of us, afraid, are we going to be out of the group? Are we going to be ostracized? That kind of thing. So honesty. And we could talk a lot about that. A key in healthy faith journeys also is friendship.
Mm,
Word community, I think, is overblown, and we don't always know what we mean by community. Community is not just like being in the same space as someone else, like being physically in the same room. That's not community. Real community is friendship. And so I think honest and deep friendship where we can journey with folks, where we're struggling, we have wounds, we have pain. I know that you talk a lot about deconstruction, and maybe we'll talk more about it, but I think part of the sadness for me when people walk away is sometimes because they don't have friendship that can sustain their journey
mm,
and friendship that can create space for them and be like, yeah, it's okay, man, that you're feeling like this. Let's just talk about that. Let's journey together. So Christian friendship, I guess, in a healthy faith way, there are definitely elements of personal rhythms with God that are key to me for healthy faith journey. Like I rarely meet someone who has a healthy faith experience that doesn't pray.
mm.
Healthy faith experience who just is like, I've already read the scripture, I don't need to read it anymore. Or a healthy faith experience who never rests, or so there's a lot of resources on that. But again, if you're just asking about common threads of health, I would add two more quick things. One is, again, it's hard. I know this is like gonna sound corporate probably, or like I'm a church guy. I just don't see a lot of really healthy, truly healthy, robust journeys without some sort of togetherness in worship.
Mhm.
Uh, prayer. Sorry, getting a call. I don't know what that was about.
It was your computer agreeing with you.
It was my computer. It was the angels. Saying, that's it, man. You got to worship together. Christianity is not an individual solo sport.
Yeah.
Our faith journeys are not like if you go outside of Christianity, the same thing is true. Like robust faith journeys are not done in isolation. So corporate worship and prayer just feels really important. And then finally, I would just say a humble learner's posture. If we're not willing to continue to learn and grow and realize like, I think I know this, but I'm willing to be challenged on it,
Yeah.
then so a lot of times you meet an 80-year-old who's walked in faith for a long time. John Mark Comer says something like this, and he says like either they're the best person ever or like they're the worst person ever because they've been just like depositing either the right stuff or the wrong stuff for decades, and either
Yeah.
they're the most bitter or they're just like humble. Like it's awesome when you meet an 85-year-old. It's like, yeah, I'm not sure about that one. I used to be really positive and now I'm not quite sure. And so
Yeah.
that learner's posture. So that's probably more than you were asking for, Marv. But
No,
that
no, no, no. I appreciate that. I mean, especially the first two, you talked about the Psalms. It brought me back to Walter Brueggemann, who just passed. and
Yeah.
his whole idea of Psalms of orientation, disorientation, and then reorientation.
Right.
I mean, that seems like that journey of honesty and trying to find
Oh,
an honest way back. But also friendship, those are just key things that I have seen in my own life. And
yeah.
so, I say definitely honesty and friendship are key to that and
Yeah.
those rhythms. So, no, that wasn't more than I wanted. It was great. It was excellent. Thank you. As we did talk about, some faith journeys do end in the dismantling of faith in Christ, and they end up rebuilding a new religious type of structure. The girl that we interviewed on the first episode with TikTok, she's going after all kinds of different structures of spirituality. But there are others who are reconstructed towards a healthier, richer faith in Jesus, where that actually strengthened their faith in the long run. And so, my question to you is have you found any common links that helped one to reconstruct towards the healthier, richer relationship with Christ? And if you have seen some of those, which ones would you say you saw?
Yeah, it's another good question. I have a bit of a caution for people considering deconstruction at the end of this. Hopefully, I'll remember it. So maybe you can remind me if not, because what you just said triggered something for me. But I, I think as I've thought a lot about my own journey, and Marv, you and I, we're only a couple of years apart and have similar, academic formation and that kind of thing. I remember when the emergent church was happening, 12, let's say 16, 18 years ago, and like a lot of people were wrestling through all this stuff. Brian McLaren was writing all these different things. And I remember at some level, I think I deconstructed in seminary. And
Hmm.
by deconstructed, I mean I looked at the systems, I looked at one way of viewing scripture, I looked at all this stuff with the help of others that could help me process and
Yeah.
think really carefully through things, and then realize like, oh yeah, there's different interpretations of these passages of scripture, or maybe there's a different way to see these traditions in faith, or maybe this fundamentalism is totally bad and we've got to just leave some of the stuff behind. And so when I remember when some of my friends started deconstructing, I was like, oh, all these questions they're asking, I feel like I asked 10 years ago in seminary. That doesn't make me better. I just feel like the healthy thread is that we have space to ask the hardest questions, the scariest questions. What if the Bible's not true? What are these stories about? All that kind of stuff. But we're there with people who won't freak out, number one, who won't think that we're some sort of heretic and kick us out, who aren't worried about our salvation that day, but just patient with us and journeying with us. And then that we can build towards the hopeful, what does Jesus offer in the world rather than always trying to figure out what he doesn't want in the world. What he
Hmm.
doesn't want in the world is really important. But I think part of the reason we deconstruct is we're left with like, is there anything hopeful here? Like if not, then I'll go find something hopeful in some other system.
Right.
And so I think that that thread of with community and then being exposed to a hopeful piece. But in that, because we're not a lot of times surrounded by professors or others who have that capacity. I I have seen personally friends who have reconstructed well have met with a counselor and dealt with their stuff,
Hmm.
met maybe with a spiritual director and found pathways of like how did they hear from God and connect with God, that kind of stuff. A willingness again not to abandon all tradition,
Hmm.
so a willingness to like wrestle honestly with the Bible. I love when people are like, "How is this possible in the Bible?" That's great. Let's do that. Let's have those hard conversations. But they're willing to at least stay in it long enough. I sense that some people jump too quick, and so
Yeah.
those who reconstruct are willing to like do the hard work inside, and that's sometimes that's really really challenging. And then, I hear a lot about people who are not rejecting Jesus, they're rejecting the church.
Yeah.
And I think there's something there. I think what they're rejecting is Christian culture, not
Yeah.
the church.
Yeah.
So rejecting the church is rejecting Jesus. So it's semantics, but like if the body of Christ, like we don't want to reject the body of Christ. What we reject is like human systems that are religious systems imposed. And so when people are like, I just can't stand the church, I go, what do we mean? And if it's like, arrogance, secrecy, abuse structures, all that kind of stuff. I hate that stuff too. Okay, so are we willing to carve out a different thing? And here's comes the caution. My fear is sometimes people jump then to create new fundamentalism in somewhere else.
Yeah.
And it's like you don't check all those new boxes, then somehow you're like, in the wrong camp. And I'm like, wow, this sounds a lot like the stuff you just walked away from? So can we find the messy middle and work through that with honesty and with humility and realizing like we're not always right about every opinion and all those kind of things.
Yeah, I think humility is definitely key in that process for both the person who's working with the deconstructor, but also for the
Yep.
person who is deconstructing. You talked about the differentiation between church and Jesus. Dan Kimball wrote a book in 2007, 2008, where it was titled "They Like Jesus but Not the Church," and it was a pretty fantastic read. His stuff was really good, and you talk about the emerging church, but there was this battle between, if you remember, the emergent and the
Yep.
emerging. And the
Yep.
emerging were the more traditional doctrinal guys, and the emergents were the crazy weirdos who Mark Driscoll was yelling at all the time.
Right.
Um, but yeah, I mean, I think during that same time, I had some similar things. I was going through spiritual formation at Nyack College. So you were in seminary while I was in college,
Right.
having similar ability to deconstruct. And I just wanted to highlight for our people listening the importance of being able to do that with others
Yeah.
that are safe. You said that, and that resonates with me. And I think it resonates with our other interviewers and interviewees where we've been talking about this. And that's been one thing where I just didn't have anyone to
Yeah.
listen without judgment.
Yep. Yep. And I think we can be, Marv, you and I and others who might resonate as leaders through helping other people to be those kind of people who aren't on the defensive and and can create space for others. I think again, let me just say one more thing to clarify. When I said I think I deconstructed in seminary, what I mean is the journey asking all the hard questions.
Mhm.
I think how we even define deconstruction is a little hit and miss right now because some people mean deny, everything, deny Jesus is, savior, deny virgin birth. And some of it's like, oh, I'm deconstructing religious systems that feel very monolithic or very confining or one way to see something. And that's definitely what I deconstructed.
Yeah.
And so I think that's actually good. Like all of our faith journey should be constant deconstruction, reconstruction at some level.
Yeah.
But anyway,
Yeah. I would say I deconstructed fundamental evangelicalism.
yeah,
That's what I was able to snip out and say,
sure.
okay, like this is not what it's about.
Right.
So yeah, no, I agree with you.
Yeah.
And terms, people like to define them themselves without
Yeah,
understanding what the other
right.
person means.
That's
Anyways.
right.
Well, the goal in cultivating candor is to help inform those who tune in on issues facing the church, particularly in the world of younger generations. And I know that you spend a lot of time working with folks in the younger generations, both on your staff, working at Life, working with young adult retreats that you do. So how does understanding the deconstruction journey in young people help the church? And
Yeah.
what ways can it help the church come alongside those who are trying to figure their faith out themselves? So, how does understanding this journey,
Yep.
deconstruction, help the church? Or does it?
It does. I think understanding this deconstruction journey is helping us understand the cultural moment we're in and also understanding ourselves better. So the thing I love about the moment we're in a bit, I don't love it. I like it. Love it's a little too strong because sometimes I get a little concerned where we're headed. But the reason I like it is because if the reason people are deconstructing is because they find a disconnect between what they thought is true about God, they believe about the Bible, and what they see in the church, the way things are lived out, whether that's from a nationalism kind of thing, we've skewed that too far, or materialism. People are just super selfish. It's like, as long as I got my money, it's okay.
Hmm.
Or, we talk big about loving the poor and the foreigner and the immigrant. And then it's like, well, when push comes to shove, maybe I don't really care about that. Or whatever,
Yeah.
or abuse in the church or those kind of things. When we see a gap, if that's the reason, then great, we need to change, because then the Lord's holding up a mirror for us to repent and say, we can't have a disconnect between the things that we read in scripture, the things that we say from the pulpit, and then how we actually live our lives. And I think in many ways, that's the reason, the fundamental reason for deconstruction. It's not the only reason. But I would say if we didn't have scandals in the church, if we didn't have a radical disconnect between true discipleship and the stuff we're saying, we wouldn't see as much deconstruction. So understanding why are people deconstructing helps us understand, why are we effective or not as a church? What are we doing?
Yeah.
Are we actually creating disciples or not? Like, is this effective? I also think there's something about currently about the young person's journey on the other side. And this is the part of deconstruction I don't love, where it feels like the overall culture is just influencing people to go, I've come up with a better way than the way of God, and you do you, and it's going to be awesome.
Yeah.
I think some people are starting to realize, like, yeah, that probably wasn't the right thing to do, because now who determines realities and all those kind of things.
Right.
But I think understanding that, then we get to study culture a bit. And I think some churches that have buried their heads in the sand, or some folks just don't, are like, well, this is all bad. Let's just try to hole away and hope for the best. Maybe God will work this all out, like
Hmm.
that's not going to work. And so I think learning about a young person's journey is to learn about the society we live in and the culture we're living in. And so that is all so valuable. As we learn through that, we hear common threads like you're already describing: loneliness, disappointment, trauma, all these kind of things. And when we hear about all that, then we get informed on, okay, how do we walk with somebody through their journey? I just find it fascinating that we wouldn't want to walk with somebody in a complex faith journey. Like, that's what we're doing. That's our whole job.
Yeah.
So if they're struggling, or they're, that's what we're doing. And so it helps us then to create empathy and compassion and patience with people on their journey. If people are genuinely deconstructing, I'd love to have that conversation. Let's just talk about why and what, and what are things that we can do better. Final thing I'll say is, our language in church is really important,
Hmm.
and the what we say, our language shapes culture. A lot of times we thoughtlessly say things from a pulpit or just in Christian conversations
Hmm.
that end up hurting people, or creating a weird us versus them, or a weird, like, do I fit in this anymore feeling without intending to. And so I think being a student of deconstruction, or a student of a young person, helps us to understand, where can we be 100% orthodox, but we don't need to use religious language for everything.
Right.
It's
Right.
many things not even scriptural. So I think it's super valuable, but we have to do the hard work. It's more on us to figure this out,
Yeah.
not just demonize those deconstructors, kind of thing.
Well, it's easier to do that.
Well,
It's
for
easy to
sure.
just say, oh, well, we just let them go. Who cares?
Right.
Rather than trying to dig in.
Yep.
And so no, that's excellent. I really appreciate your response to that. So a lot has been said from those who are on the deconstruction journey themselves. And a lot of what they brought up, like you had mentioned already, was church hurt and church trauma. How can church leaders or parents or those who work with youth or those who are deconstructing that might not be youth, how can they help people to unpack and heal from church trauma and or church pain?
Yeah.
I really think that this is, in my discussions with folks on deconstruction, this is kind of a sparking point for them, their church pain or their church trauma. So, how can we help them heal and walk through it?
Yeah. I mean, there's not one laser answer here. I wish there was,
Yeah.
but a lot of this has to do with creating the kind of space for conversation and holding space for people in conversation that feels longer and more intense than we're maybe used to or would prefer. And what that means in real terms is not being defensive, first of all, when people bring up their journey or their, and not to immediately jump to, well, that's not how every church is, or, well, I'm sorry your pastor's like that, but that's not the way it is, or, well, that's just a misinterpretation of scripture. I see people get really defensive because they're afraid of, the accusations or and this is this me or whatever. So not being defensive, simply saying thank you to people who bring up concerns and go, thanks, this helps me consider. But then actually connecting people with resources for healing. I mentioned counseling. I so I personally have experienced genuine trauma
Mhm.
from Christian leaders, notably a family member. But then the resulting church environment felt traumatic to me.
Mm.
I personally have gotten a lot of counseling. I mean, I was joking with my wife that I think I've spent $12,000 on, when you add up all the counseling and all the stuff, that's a lot of money. It was money well spent, but so I've lived through some of this, and not everybody in my family and not everybody in my close friend group weathered the storm that I went through in the same way. And some of them walked away, and people that I'm very close with still have completely walked away. I think the grace in my life was I had friends like Rob Reamer and some others who were there for me day one and who helped connect me to resources so I didn't feel alone, but I also could process all of this pain and hurt. So I think we've got to err on the side of care always, listening, not being defensive, and actually trying to help people heal. I also think in the conversations, we need to ask really good questions to separate out what we're really talking about.
Yeah.
Because not every experience um, is a part of a larger whole. Sometimes it is very unique. Sometimes the experience is just in our individualistic society, we don't like submitting to one another.
Mhm.
And so that can feel tricky to people. And so when you think back, like I don't think my youth pastor was traumatizing me by trying to tell me not to have sex with my girlfriend in high school. I think he was helping me.
Yeah.
But I have other friends who think that they were being traumatized by having any kind of advice about. Now, did we overdo it in purity culture? Probably.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, we did. And we got whack ideas about some of the stuff. But I don't think that I don't want to poke the bear too much here, but I don't think talking about doctrine is always a traumatizing experience.
Right.
I think some of that we have to differentiate out. So there is very real hurt and trauma. We need to create space for that. We also need to ask good questions to just
Mhm.
help people in honesty to try to figure out where is the real root? What are we talking about here? Is this about a person? Is this about a concept? Is this about theology? Is this about a church system? But we have to be willing to do that. And I just don't see a lot of people, the patience that it requires to do that's hard. So,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it is like you said, $12,000 worth of counseling. There's time and money that gets spent into that.
yeah,
But being people who provide help, the church, I think if they see someone that needs trauma therapy,
yeah,
they can't afford it, they should say, "Hey, we love you enough. We want to come alongside you.
yeah, we're
We'll
going to
pay
help
the
you.
bill."
Yeah.
But it does take that time. So I really appreciate that, and even bringing in your own journey, I think is helpful to see what helped you get through where you were at. There's you talked about purity culture, and there's this TikTok person that is she's pretty famous, and she talks about purity culture the whole time, and some of the stuff that she says was traumatizing. I'm like, okay, that whatever. But then there are some that are
Yeah.
legit.
No, totally. There's this balance where the purity culture thing did traumatize a lot of people. So I want
Yeah,
to be careful there. I'm not,
yeah, yeah.
but having no boundaries around our human sexuality is crazy. Like
Right,
no one really, if you press them, would say, "Hey, do you think your 13-year-old should start having sex?" I mean, even if you don't have, you're like, I don't think so. Okay, why? All right, so let's talk about that. But to do that in healthy and helpful ways is the key. And so, yeah, it's complicated, man. And the youth ministry culture we grew up in was intense, and I'm embarrassed by some of it. I don't know how if I was always traumatized by it or if I'm
yeah,
just more embarrassed by it. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think there's a little bit of both and
Yeah,
the silver ring thing was a little bit, those were
yeah,
intense if you ever
sure.
went to one of those. But so yeah, it's key to listen and see where they're at. And when someone trusts you with their doubts, fears, frustrations, anxieties, and dissonance with the Christian faith, have you thought of good ways to help them find their way back to a solid faith in
Yeah,
Jesus? And if so, what ways have you seen? I mean, because they're sitting there, they're sharing these things, the church pain, the church trauma,
yeah.
their dissonance with their faith. So yeah, I'd love to hear your input.
So let me say what it's not first. I think we don't help people when we just try to invite them back to Sunday service as their first thing. We don't help people when we try to answer all their questions really fast and go, well, I'll show you in the Bible where this is, and that we don't try to fast forward the conversation. So when I've seen this work and done well, it's been a multi-month year process of regular coffees together, of regular dialogue, and frankly, personal testimony. So, one of the things I say to people is like, I've had people point blank ask me a number of times, friends who have walked away or whatever, like, why are you still doing this? Like, why do you really still? I remember I had a youth group kid call me up and I hadn't talked to them in a few years. And they just called me up this like 10 years ago and said, no hello, no hi, and just said, do you still believe all that stuff you used to tell us? And I
Wow.
said, hi, first of all, you doing all right? And and what I say is, yeah, I haven't found a better alternative. I don't want to feel like the cheesy disciples thing, but I really, where else would I go? Because I've
Yeah.
thought about some other alternatives. Trusting myself for all the answers, not great. Finding some other fundamentalist system, no. No other religious system. So my own personal testimony and the testimony of honest friends who have wrestled deeply with their faith and their journeys, who
Mhm.
have healed from trauma, being able to witness and say, hey, Jesus met me in this. I haven't, I still believe he's the way and I haven't found a better way. I find to be the most impactful rather than some packaged like, hey, come. Now, you mentioned I'm a pastor too. So
Mhm.
I do want people to go to church. And I hope that they end up back in church, but I don't think that the Sunday service is the first place for the. So our normal responses to like, I'll just fix this for somebody is just not. We have to go counterintuitive a bit on this. But again, some of this, Marv, I would say it's like if we're working with a person who's not yet to faith. If
Mhm.
they walked away from faith, we don't, person not yet to faith, we don't, day one start in with, the doctrine of sanctification. We talk about who Jesus is and what is the Bible. And I think even some of those fundamental things to go back to and talk about is good.
Yeah. No, that's good. Treating them like an that they're an unbeliever, I think is a good way to approach it. Not to be like, oh, let's you're an
Yeah.
unbeliever now, but to have that mindset of how to approach them, I think is key. I
And
really
so then I seed. What I'll do then is seed. Like you ask about specific ways. I'll seed the movie or the song or like I would with a non-believing friend. Like, man, listen to this. Does this resonate with you?
yeah.
Mumford's new album, he's kind of come back to, he's like reconstructing in some way. And
Huh.
so his new album, there's like almost worship songs on it. I talked to one of my friends about that. Hey, what do you think about this? Who's kind of walked away like, yeah, it was weird. It felt like I was listening to a worship album. I go, yeah, but I think part of it's he got to the end of his rope. Okay,
Mm.
so then we can start talking about that because it feels safe to see some secular musician who's now come back to faith and just talk about art unlocks stuff for people. So you
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
create a little bit more space for conversation with a movie or a song.
No, I appreciate that. Yeah, art does unlock a lot of things that words alone just can't.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
good. Just a couple more questions for you before I let you go. Many parents and older church members I talk about deconstruction with have a sense of hopelessness about the future of the church and these generations. There's just this blanket, oh, there's no hope. This is where the church dies, you know? And I do not share in their hopelessness, and I'd guess neither do you. So when we look at this situation of deconstruction, this cultural landscape, what gives you hope for the future of the church and the believers that make up the church? Where does that hope come from? What do you see?
Yeah. I have so many thoughts about this, so hopefully I'll stay concise. Just interrupt me if I start rambling. So I would just start first with the fact that the church is Jesus's, period. The church is Jesus's, all right? So it's not ours. It doesn't belong to one country. It doesn't belong to one culture.
Mhm.
Fact is, we have more Christians in the world today than ever before, and Christianity is spreading rapidly around the world. When people say it's the end of the church, what they mean is it's the end of a version of American Christianity.
Yeah.
So, A, it's just good to have perspective that like God's big and he's on the move. Number two, actually in our country, we're seeing reversal of trends.
Mm.
I mean, for the first time, we're seeing Gen Z saying, actually, I would consider myself a Christian. There's a rise in young men who are affiliating with Christianity.
Mhm.
And I was recently, 3 weeks ago, I was down at Asbury. So practically, we're just seeing stuff pop up on campuses all over America. People, I mean, kids are coming to Christ, getting baptized left and right. This stuff is real. I live in Columbus. The stuff that's happened at Ohio State is so real. There was like a revival on the football team. Some of those guys were friends of friends. They're baptizing people, just like spontaneous baptisms. They're bringing them to church, integrating them in. So this is real. I was down at Asbury, which had, this outpouring a couple of years ago where they went for 20 days straight of worship and prayer and all that kind of stuff. I was there, super privileged to be there with leaders, about 50 leaders from around the country.
Mm.
Zach Mearcreeves helped welcome some of those guys in. He was the guy preaching at Asbury. He's an Alliance guy, so I've known him for a long time. But it was leaders of like the leaders of Alpha, leaders of Passion City, leaders of Radiant Church, Gateway Church, former people from IHOP talk about Reconstruction, all kinds of different stuff going on. And then the very first day we did interviews from around the globe and US cities on Zoom, and all their stories were the same. Kids reading the Bible in their early 20s, young adults, like unprovoked, coming to church saying, teach us about Jesus, getting baptized and quickly getting discipled.
Wow.
10,000 people came to faith around Easter in France. That's like miraculous.
Wow.
And all the stories around the room, my faith was just getting boosted left and right. People are going, yeah, we can't even contain what's happening. So I think what we see on the news or what we see on social media is one version of this. And sometimes with our own kids, we see some hopelessness in public school. But one of the things you and I talked about before that's related is there's renewal and revival, I think, on the way, and it's happening. It's happening in the UK, where the church was sort of dead. It's happening in various places. I think it's also tied to a larger cultural moment we're in. And I mentioned this to you that I listened to a podcast recently about meta-modernity. So we've been living in this post-modernity moment. Meta-modernity basically says, okay, if you crush every system like post-modernity does, then what?
Yeah.
And meta-modernity says, I think there might be some unifying threads here of like what is beauty, what is goodness, and not a dissatisfaction with just sitting in the rubble. So what I see in Gen Z is a desire for something good.
Yeah.
And they're not always going to Christianity or to Jesus for that, but I do see a growing sense that like it's not okay just to burn everything down. Like, where are we going with this?
Yeah.
So you're seeing that in movies. You're seeing that those themes starting to emerge and in art and music, those kind of things. So that's really encouraging. And I travel a lot more, so I guess I have the blessing and the curse of like seeing a lot of stuff, but just seeing that there's so many hopeful stories being written all the time. Some of those are not in white conservative evangelical circles. They're in immigrant circles. They're in urban places that we didn't assume. They're just maybe surprising things.
Yeah.
So we just need to be careful, that we're not announcing the end of the world too soon.
Yeah. Well, and I think that that's part of the problem for the people that feel the hopelessness is that they're in a very small, narrow box. And we live in a town with a state university, and the things that come out of the state university that are against faith, and hearing these stories of high school students taking a religious class and walking away from Jesus.
Sure.
So, I mean, I think we have an isolated view in my town. And that's why I wanted to get your perspective on the globalization of this, because you have seen way more than I have and have experienced more and heard way better stories. I've talked with Zach and spent a lot of time with him at council and heard what God did in a first account
Yeah.
basis. It was incredible stuff.
Yeah.
So I like the switch really quickly to a multicultural aspect, like you had mentioned. We do live in a culturally pluralistic society. You can't go even in Indiana without experiencing some of the diversity of the pluralism of the cultures that we have and the views of goodness and beauty and religion. But when it comes to leading people closer to Jesus, because you have a ton of international experience, what role does this cultural understanding play? Not just the youth culture, but the
Yeah.
actual culture of the person. And what is it? What part does that play? Not just like I said, generationally, but globally. And
Yeah.
why can't I just think like a Westerner anymore?
Yeah, man. Our world has really changed. So I think what we could get away with 40, 50 years ago in this country, which is kind of a monolithic, there were always immigrants, but it was kind of maybe an exception rather than a rule. A
Yeah,
very strong majority culture is no longer our reality. And so what it means for us, if we want to be effective Christians, Christian leaders, and others, is that we have to add being a student of culture and even multiculturalism and cultural intelligence
hmm
to our required toolkit. So I would say like anybody who wants to be a pastor has to go through like IDI, intercultural development inventory, or some cross-cultural training. I mean, you heard me at seminary teach just on basic intro to cross-cultural stuff
yeah,
because we cannot just hope that we'll figure it out. Culture is very complex. It's just like learning a language in some ways. You can't just automatically learn Chinese, but you can't also learn how a Chinese person thinks. In my town, I'm on the east side of Columbus. My kid's school district has 47 languages spoken.
wow,
Okay, so Columbus, Ohio, I think 50 years ago, I'm guessing there were three languages spoken, maybe
Hmm.
five, right? But
Yeah,
now we have almost 50. What does that mean? It means I can choose to minister to the people who fit in my category. But if I'm going to be effective to my town now, I have to learn. I can't be an expert in every single language or every single cultural group, but I can at least know myself, learn my own culture, and then learn how to minister. So in our little church, we have a church of 100 people or so, 120 people. I'm not the lead pastor of the church, but we serve there. My wife's on the board. We have already launched. This little church has been willing to be students of culture. Have already launched a Congolese church. They're doing their own thing. We have a Fulani church, very first service on Sunday, going to meet. We have a Nepalese church that meets in the building on Sunday afternoons. And all our leaders, I think what they've done is they just realize we got to learn and we got to release and empower. We're not the best people to minister to all these groups, but
right,
no, neither can we just be like, well, that's not our thing.
right.
If we just say it's not our thing, we're done. So that is true. Like I don't want to be alarmist, but like then you're just going to be completely irrelevant
hmm
very short amount of time. Now I know in towns like Indiana or you have a little bit of a longer leash because you don't have 47 languages in your school district, but the world is changing so rapidly and the way people live online in globalized ways, they're exposed to people and cultures in ways that we have to be learners. And I know it feels intimidating, but like tonight we have a picnic in our parking lot at our church. One of the guys texted me 2 days ago and said, "Hey Tim, can you make sure you're there at 6 because I speak French?" He was like, I think we have a bunch of Africans coming and like no one knows to speak their language. Can you make sure you're there at 6 just to translate?" Yeah, great. That's what churches, I love that. I'm like, yeah, I'm there, man.
Cool.
Because that's what the fun of doing this is. So they
Yeah.
connected with our cell program and that kind of thing. So it's good.
Wow, a Nepalese church, Congolese church. That's awesome, man.
Yeah, man.
I love that. And when I was in seminary with you in the DMin program, the cultural intelligence that you pushed on us a lot as a professor, was just a reminder of the importance of it all. I had done some of that in the master's degree program, but you pressed it pretty hard. And, I know why, and I see your heart for it. And I think all believers, anyone who's watching this podcast, the honest truth is that you've got to get out of your comfort zone and you've
Right.
got to learn something different. We can't just keep doing what we've always been doing. And that's just so key. So thank you for that, especially from your experience of so much multiculturalism, and experiencing that and translating that for us. So my final question, I know I've taken up a good chunk of your time and I appreciate
Right.
it, but what is it that you do for fun? You do a lot. You're working a lot. You're serving a lot. You're doing a lot of stuff with your wife and kids. What is it that Tim Meier does for fun?
I love to have fun, man. I fight for fun. I tell everybody that we all got to fight for fun when we're working hard. I'm a big sports fan, so my oldest son and I watch a lot of sports. I also love music. I collect vinyl records, and so I'm always on the hunt where I'm, in a record shop or something like that. And I play music too, so that's super fun for me. Running used to be really fun for me. Now it's just so I can eat pizza in my mid 40s. Basically, it's kind of not as fun as it used to be. But yeah, sports and music. I love hanging out with my family. We play a ton of board games. My wife and I have just learned in the intensity, we've been married 23 years this summer, and in the intensity of ministry and life and cross-cultural living and stuff, we prioritize having fun together. And honestly, Marv, I think there's something to be said there in this deconstruction conversation that, and maybe that's people on healthy faith journeys know how to like laugh and have fun and aren't so tightly wound that they miss out on the beauty of living and
Yeah.
life.
Yeah.
So yeah. Anyway.
Well, that's good. That's a lot of things you're doing for fun and making sure that you are making time for fun. I think that's a good word for everybody. So if you're watching this and you haven't been making time for fun, you need to change.
Yeah. Right.
But yeah, Tim, seriously, thanks for joining us. We are just glad to be able to have you on with us. And I, as a person, have always loved journeying with you in faith and all the different facets of ministry that we found ourselves in together. So thank you
Same.
so much, and thanks for coming on.
Of course, bro. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. This has been Cultivating Candor, episode 5. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode with Drew and I and Crazy Ed the Zebra, along with Tim Meier, and some great insight on journeys of faith and coming back to Jesus from a deconstructive mindset. Next episode is episode 6, and we'll be interviewing Ron Walborn. See you next time.